Okay, Russ Yeager, doing your thing. Whenever you're ready, take one.
All right. Hey, this is Russ Yeager from RussYeager.com. You're listening to Jeff on Vroom, Vroom, Veer, and you need to listen up because you're probably going to learn something, and I guarantee you're going to have some fun.
Perfect. You were supposed to screw up a little bit.
I can do it again.
No. We don't do do-overs just so you can screw up. We'll just laugh about it. All right. So I'm going to hit stop and make a new file, and I'll be right back.
Are you ready to thoughtfully steer away from your revved up, frenzied, and far too often scripted life? Then welcome to Vroom Vroom Veer with Jeff Smith, where he guides you down the road differently traveled by sharing unique experiences with guests who have managed to shift away from a life stuck on cruise control and veered their way into a more authentic and fulfilling one in all sorts of interesting and kind of remarkable ways. Get ready to Vroom Vroom Veer with your differently traveled road chauffeur, Jeff Smith.
Rob Scott, thank you so much for being on Vroom Vroom Veer and welcome to the show. How's it going?
Jeff, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
So you are at, fortunately and easily, robscott.com. That's awesome. Very easy name, very easy URL. So talk briefly about what you're most excited about in your business today.
Wow. I am all about helping human beings really shift profoundly. I do something called identity shifting. And so the level of coaching that I'm doing with people is really helping them edit self-concept way down at the deepest levels of their self-concept. We're shifting, inner limits and limiting beliefs and things like that just become very, very valuable so that they can become quite actually a next version of themselves that's much more complete and capable and confident and happy. And I'm moving more and more toward helping other coaches do that. So I coach a lot of coaches. Nice. And so trying to share these tools with other people so that in a lot of ways I can help the helpers, and we can, I'm really trying to shift at the biggest level. I'm trying to shift consciousness on planet Earth.
That's awesome. And I have to admit something that's a little weird for me. Chatting with you and talking to you, like way back when, this is like early aughts. So like 2005, 2006, 7, 8, 9 in that region. I had a website blog thing called Shift Your Consciousness.
Wow. Look at that.
And then I had another thing, and it was all about it was called Shiftcast, and it was a podcast based on Shift Your Consciousness. So when I started reading your stuff, I'm like, this is kind of like he's doing what I was trying to do.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And maybe we could just become good friends, I think it's exciting.
Neat. I'm loving the fact that more than one person has the same idea and the other person is way better at executing it because, I've already figured out that I have a lot of good ideas that I'm not going to execute.
Yeah.
And I'm just happy when somebody else does the thing that I was not able to do. Having an idea is the easy thing. That's like super easy. Executing an idea is where you get your paycheck.
That is very true. And it is the thing that tends to take time and energy and a whole lot of effort to make it a real thing in the world, for sure.
Amen. So yeah, that was always like a little Twilight Zone to me. I mean, just reading your stuff, I'm like, this is so weird. But I will say this, you picked better keywords to wrap around your idea to shift your consciousness.
Oh, thank you.
Shift your consciousness is not a good keyword set, just so you know.
Yeah. I don't hate it at all. It is what I'm trying to do. So it sounds, to my ears, that sounds
obviously
lovely,
it sounds lovely to you, but we're talking about Google, right?
True.
Anyway, so I digress. Let's talk a little bit about Rob Scott when you were growing up. Where did you grow up?
Yeah, I think one of the things that it really fuels everything that I'm working on. I'm somebody who, I think so many of us, or certainly too many of us, go through a lot of difficult abuse and dysfunction when you're really young. So for me, I grew up in a household where there was someone in my life that I used to be sent to be babysat, and he did a lot of things to me. Not to start off super dark, but it was a lot of abuse and sexual abuse and rape. And that went on in my life actually for years. And
Wow.
what it did to me was it really didn't let me grow up with trust and safety and, really a good emotional landscape. I had to survive things that were honestly a little too much for someone of that age to be able to deal with. So at a very young age, I got into drinking and drugs and partying, and just wasn't.
You were trying to numb out the pain, basically, right?
100%. Yeah. 100%. So I was using those things as tools to help me feel better, and
right.
In one sense they work really, really well. They alter how you feel pretty quickly, right. But it leads to a ton of dysfunction. And so, not to skip through it too quickly, that led to me being just barely showing up at school in any way.
Right.
Luckily, I was smart enough to do okay through school, but I wasn't paying any attention or really applying myself in any way. After that, I ended up, very addicted as a late teen and into my 20s. I ended up homeless, in and out of all kinds of institutions, in and out of jails and rehabs and halfway houses and different things like that. I was homeless for a long time. And then,
wow.
And
this was all still in high school?
No. This was like into my 20s.
Okay.
And stuff. So that dysfunction from my teens into my 20s
just got through. Right.
Yeah. It just got worse and worse and worse. Quite honestly, it was more and more dysfunction. And I had, my company's called Fundamental Shift. And this is maybe the biggest Veer, right, that I can speak into. I really had this wake up experience that was incredibly profound. I always try to be careful talking about it because it starts to sound very woo-woo, but it was really that I started to see my own stories in a new way. I saw how much I was carrying these limits into my every interaction. And so I started to notice how much I was carrying what I call a victim identity into my life. And for that to remain true, I was finding ways to, continue to be a victim. This went wrong, that went wrong. And there's a bit of a payoff for that. As I was telling people about my life and how hard my life had been, I would get attention and, oh, poor you, and wow, aren't you tough? And so there's these little payoffs. But what I was waking up to was, what would it be like if I put all that down and really came at this new and fresh? And how do you do that? And what does that look like? And just to go very quickly through it, I made this shift, and I literally went from homeless without a college degree, without any kind of credentials at all. And I ended up going up the corporate chain in just a handful of years and became vice president of technology at a company, just became really highly functional. And what I realized was, not only was I able to get really good results for myself, but I was able to help the people around me get really great results too. And just to add a detail, in the middle of that kind of corporate rise, I got really sick with cancer in the middle of that. So I literally almost died from cancer, had to do a very aggressive chemo, over and over for a long time, and, had an operation, all the stuff, right? So I ended up in this place where I really know what it is to be emotionally dysfunctional, physically dysfunctional, mentally dysfunctional, and almost what it takes to come back from that. And so in about 2005, which podcasting had just come out, I started a podcast years ago.
And wow, that was the early days of podcasting.
Yeah, it was literally, and so I was right. I was one of the only shows. I was one of the only shows out there. There weren't a ton of people listening, but of the people that were listening, lots of them started listening to me. And so I had people all over the world that started asking me for coaching.
Wow.
So I'm this vice president at a company. I'm on the side doing this podcast where I'm trying to talk about conscious evolution and what is meditation and how do we get past our limits and all that stuff. And, people in like Ireland and Canada and Australia were saying, how do I pay you to work with me? Wow. And so I ended up talking to a close friend who was also my chiropractor at the time. And he was listening to the podcast. I don't think I even knew that at the time. And I said, all these people ask for coaching. And he just goes, I would hire you right now for coaching. And I had really dismissed it. I was like, well, I'm not a coach. Like maybe I'm an author or philosopher. I don't know what I am yet, but I just have these ideas. And I cared about this guy so much. I was like, you know what, let's do it. And I just, named a number, started working with him. And very quickly he started getting results. And this guy was a connector. And so all of a sudden he started like funneling people to me.
Sure.
And I had this full coaching practice. So I
this
left
was
my
2005-ish. still?
This is 2005 into 2006, like that time. And I decided to leave my corporate gig. I left a lot. I was in a relationship with a phenomenal person who's still a close friend of mine, but that was something that I also decided to leave. And so I left this big house. I went from homeless to having a really nice house in Philadelphia. I left that. I ended up, selling that to the person I was living with, moved into a little apartment in South Philadelphia. And I really got into what is it like to really help people change. And what I discovered was I've been doing this since I was a little kid. I was the little guy trying to talk his parents into a different point of view when they were arguing, or, all these different things were going on. And so I had this almost like a skill set that was something that had helped me survive stuff.
Right.
And it became really, really functional. And, so
it was almost like this organic thing that just grew out of your survival.
Well, it was a lovely discovery into what my purpose is, what I really want to do here on planet Earth. I'm so, earnestly driven to really help people that are suffering, because there is
so much, basically.
And it's so much, it's almost the human condition. Right. And I realized that there's a way to be where we don't have to have that same relationship with our own mentality, with our own emotional reality. There are really shortcuts that can very quickly and permanently shift those, so that we find ourselves much more wise, much more resilient, much more able to experience happiness and joy and presence and all these different things. And so I really just dove in, and I've been doing that ever since. So I guess I've been running this for 14 years or so, and just went full time into coaching people. And since then I've built products and programs, and I run a big group mastermind, and, I'm just doing a lot with it. And I'm thrilled with what I'm working on.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. That's a lot to drill into.
Yeah. Sorry to give you the.
No, that's great. It's always, it's amazing, because I'm listening to this ginormous life brain dump, and I could tell you've done that a lot. So good on you. And congratulations.
Thank you.
Not only surviving, but thriving through adversity. So
thank you.
It's pretty scary stuff that you went through. If you don't mind, I'd like to drill down in a little bit of that stuff. Just
absolutely not.
No, you can't.
That's the whole thing. We can't. There's not another word to be said about it. We're done. This is it. Let's wrap the show right here.
Okay.
Yeah, no, go ahead. What would you like?
Well, let's go back and talk a little bit about maybe starting in the childhood and the abuse stuff.
Yeah.
Because that made me think of what was that movie? Precious, I want to say. Was it where this girl was getting raped and she was going into her fantasy world, and I don't know.
That's a great pickup. It's really interesting, because I hadn't thought about that in a while, but there was the way I had to deal with that. And I have said some of this before, but I never thought about it exactly that way. To survive some of that stuff, you have to turn off your mind in a sense, and go to other places. And the way I've described that in the past is it's very much like you almost have to develop multiple personalities, so that you can have versions of yourself that can kind of endure things and shut off. And I recently was coaching somebody who was talking about parenting, and in his corrections, he was noticing he was getting upset, but he watched his son just turn off and not listen at all. And I remember quite frequently when bad things were happening, I would go completely numb and just, really not even be there. And it is, I think it's
a defense mechanism.
It's a survival strategy that can be really effective to get you through that moment. But if you don't heal from that long term, you end up very split, very dysfunctional, very like that. That's not going to work in a healthy relationship with a partner today, right? To just turn off if they're saying something that's upsetting or whatever.
So there's this movie that was basically universally hated, that you might want to go back and check out.
Okay. Well, let me write it down. This sounds exciting.
Well, it's easy. Sucker Punch. Sucker Punch.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever heard of Sucker Punch?
I don't think I have. Tell me the.
I'll give you
plot.
the short of it. Okay. So, all of this stuff, all the commentary that I'm going to give you is speculation. Okay. From the internet. Okay. So you don't really know. Okay. But on the surface, right? It's very much a cartoony action movie, right? Mm-hmm. And all of the protagonists are women, and and there's like these 3 different layers of reality in the movie. So there's like this, they're really in an asylum, right? And basically the main character is scheduled to get a lobotomy in 2 weeks if something dramatic doesn't happen.
Right.
Okay, that's one level. And you basically sometimes see that happening, that world, right? Where they're all in grungy clothes. And then there's this other reality where they're all in a brothel and they're all made up and they're dancing. And whenever the main character dances, then that dance is standing in for something, right? Right. And they don't say what, right? It's very much a sucker punch.
I'm totally watching this. I'm totally going to watch this.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then
sold.
You're all in to go ahead and assume what you want to assume about what's happening when she's dancing. But then when she's dancing, they go to another level of reality where they're all flying superheroes with guns and doing karate and killing monsters in a gigantic, huge action movie way. Okay. So the idea there is every time she's dancing, she's actually getting raped or gang raped. And again, that's a theory, right?
Sure.
That you don't really know. And it's not going to give you that, but it's all open to interpretation. So
wow,
I know, right? All wrapped up in, if you just watch it at that one level, it's just this movie that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
So to me, I bought the Blu-ray like right away. I was like, I gotta get into that.
I gotta get into it. Yeah. I'm in.
Yeah. So that's what I thought of, like, that's sort of like that horrific sort of like traumatic experience that you have to suffer, especially as a child. And she was basically a child in the movie. It's got to be you've got to come up with these armoring techniques that you're making up as you go just to survive. And then the repercussions of that. Yes. So did you ever get any sort of help for that? Like some sort of therapy or anything like that?
So it's very funny. Yeah. I mean, I used to just eat through therapists, like just eat them up and
I suppose, right,
spit them out, because
that makes sense.
I was so angry and hurting and didn't want to conform with what authority told me to do or any of that stuff. And so, we started getting into, maybe middle school, let's say, and before you know it, they're forcing me into therapy. And so I would have lots of fun. Like I remember one time my mom wanted me to go to see specifically a Christian counselor at one point. And so I did that for a while, and I used to horrify this poor therapist. I remember her first name. I don't remember her last name right now, but I would like make her cry. Like I would tell her things that were so difficult and damaging. I don't mean to laugh about it, but it was it was almost a pleasure for me to show her like how hard life could be that she didn't understand. And it was, anyway, it was,
no, I get that.
Yeah. I would go through these things, and some were, I ended up having I got institutionalized at one point, and that came with, psychological help with this guy, and his name was Harvey, and he was amazing. And he was very helpful. Later in life, when I really chose to do it on my own, I went and had a guy who I still talk to this day. I had a conversation with him earlier today, as a matter of fact. And he is somebody who really helped me amazingly. His name is Will Halm, and just a phenomenal counselor, and somebody who had his own addiction stuff, and he'd been sober for a long time. And I was specifically,
it's almost like the person you need.
It was, in a lot of ways, he became a father figure to me. He became just somebody I really trusted.
But a sympathetic ear, somebody on your side.
He was somebody who'd been through a lot of what I'd been through.
Right.
And just was,
it's almost like you need that. At that young age, you almost need the recovery movement sort of
totally
therapy, and where you're just talking about the bullshit.
Yeah. Well,
not just the bullshit and the pain, right?
Right. So this was, I was now in my 30s when this happened. So this was like early in my 30s.
Okay.
Where I'd finally committed to, I went through that whole corporate rise, and I had quit really heavy stuff because I had been addicted to all the heavy ones, like all the heavy hitters. I was into, heroin and crack and just like real bad stuff. Literally, if they'd said there was a worse drug, I would have been running to be first in line for it, because I was so self-destructive and trying to escape and trying to not feel and all that stuff. And so to become that shift that took me into the corporate world, I'd set some new boundaries for myself, but I was still drinking.
Right.
I was still drinking and smoking weed. I had all these rules about my consumption. So I was like, okay,
Right.
I won't buy cocaine, but if somebody like leaves me a line on the back of the toilet, I'll do it. I won't do acid, but I'll do shrooms because they're natural. Right. It was this kind of navigation.
I've done these things. These negotiating with your vices, I call it.
Yeah, but no heroin, nothing intravenous. We won't be doing any of that. Like there were these really clear
boundaries
lines
on your vices. Okay.
Yeah, and so I became successful, but in reality, if you looked at it, I was still like a functioning alcoholic, right? I was still a functioning
you
drug
got
addict.
to basically baseline U.S. normal.
Yes, exactly. But I was in a place where we were primarily an advertising company at the time. And so it was a very sexy environment. So we had things like Beer Friday,
right,
and everybody be drinking. And so I could go out to lunch, and because I was good at tech, but I was also could do the sales part, I was getting invited into sales meetings where there was drinking, and I drank really well, quote unquote. Like I could drink a lot and still highly function. So I would go out to lunch and have 4 martinis, come back, lead a meeting, and it was just no big deal. And so it wasn't like I had to hide it necessarily. I was so effective at the job that if I didn't show up till 11 in the morning, the head of HR would go over and like move my chair around so it looked to the company like I was there, but she knew I wasn't in yet.
You're just nursing a hangover.
Right. So it was incredibly dysfunctional, but I was functioning pretty highly in it and all that. And so at that job, I just got done with, I wanted to have a relationship with consciousness that was direct. I didn't want to alter my consciousness anymore. And I had been forced in and out of things like AA and all these things, and that really never resonated with me. And I talked to a friend who had some sobriety at the time, and I was like, I'm just really bummed. And he said, you should talk to this guy, which is this Wilhelm guy. And so I went into him not sober, but talking about like, I want to be sober. And so what does that look like? And I think 6 months later, I got sober. I'm sober now over 16 years. And it was just a phenomenal experience and almost a different way into that. So I still, I'm very in touch with 12-step programs and have a lot of respect for it. I help clients get to that sometimes when that's important. I love those principles. And actually through working with this guy, a lot of those principles are in what we do, but I don't go to meetings, or I don't spend a lot of time doing that. Not that I wouldn't, but I just, that hasn't been my path.
Sure.
And yeah, but it's been really, really incredible. But that commitment to get sober, it really changed that corporate experience. So the last probably couple years of that corporate experience, I was now sober, and how that whole job related to me, it was almost like I had died, and they were like, who's this new guy who's no longer no longer smoking or drinking?
Rob.
Yeah. I remember I was in the elevator with the CEO, who was a phenomenal, successful human who, isn't unhealthy necessarily in his drinking, but enjoyed drinking and had that kind of fun culture at the company and everything.
Right.
And he looked at me, and I told him that, he's like, did you quit smoking and drinking? I said, yeah. And he goes, man, I wish you'd only quit smoking. Like it was this comment where, he missed going out and having a drink with me,
Right.
And it wasn't that I wouldn't go out. The whole time I would still go to bars, but I'm just getting water. But it really is a different version, because there's a version of me 4 martinis in that's on top of a table, like getting the whole room to do shots. Right. And there's the sober version that's really
loud,
interested
drunk
in
guy. Yeah.
Well, right. But there's the other version that's like really interested in consciousness and what you're really sad about. Right. Like, what can we talk about or fix here? So I became a very different person in that experience, which,
so you're starting to fit in a little bit less there, probably.
I'm starting to fit in. Yeah. And it was, I mean, it wasn't like I became an outcast or anything, but it was very different. And it really solidified for me the purpose of what I wanted to do, right? So when I started the podcast and I started to see that it was helping people, and people started asking for coaching, and I could help people, whether or not that was ever going to make me the same kind of money or whatever, I was just like, oh, that's what I need to do. That's what I'm called and interested in and care to be focusing on. And luckily I've been able to build it up so I can make a lot more money now than I ever made then. And it's been something that I didn't have to put down that success to do it, but it's been, I would have, had it been something where it's like, okay, you can only barely survive doing this, I still would choose it,
Right. No, so, I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about meditation and when you found it and how your practices evolved. 'Cause
Sure.
I know you're into it. So let's get into that a little bit. Where in your story did you start or maybe discover the effectiveness, or that you liked it, or did you not like it?
Sure. So I think I had a couple of run-ins with it where I saw the value of it and I understood it. But I remember the one where it was really an epiphany, and I think I was either about to be sober or getting sober. So again, probably, 15 years ago or so. And I remember having this thought where, okay, I should be able to move my attention to my breath and just stop thinking. Like, why would that be hard to do?
Right.
And so I decided, and I remember I was like on a bus, literally, I think going into work or something.
That's perfect.
And so I just moved my attention to my breath, and I realized I could only get to like 1 or 2 breaths before some thought was happening. And I'm sitting there going like, who's doing this thinking? Like, I'm not doing this thinking. Where's this thinking coming from, and why can I control it? And so very quickly it became something where I was deeply interested in like, where are these thoughts coming from? What's driving them? What's the control of my attention? Why is my attention scattered when I'm choosing for it not to be? All these things. And so I started playing with it, and I've really found a few ways. I have a free program that people can check out called Back to Breath, which is a way. It's a 7-day meditation challenge where you could literally pick, hey, I want to try and sit for a minute a day for 7 days and see what that is. But each day I give you a different way to play with your attention and your awareness. And people who've been sitting for 10 years go through that and they go, wow, I never quite heard it like that, because our attention is really the whole game, right? If we can't focus on, our happiness, then if we're lost in thought because we're so scattered, we're not going to really be where joy lives, which is right here in this moment, present, having a laugh, doing that really fully. And in our doing, if we can't focus into what's most important and leave our mind there with some, if we're instead ruminating over something we're sad about, or if we're scattered and, can't stop scrolling and all that stuff, then we have no power over our attention. And so what's really foundational to living a good life is starting to see, and gain mastery over like, where is my attention, and what am I, how can I manage that differently? And so I've come up with some really good tools to help people, shift into that very quickly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you have any sort of like books or teachers or techniques that were fundamental to that discovery, or did you just make it up on your own?
Yeah, I mean, I think I did make it up. There's some distinctions. Well, right. I mean, there's great books. There's a lot of great books on it, but not. Can I share kind of the foundational idea?
Yeah, of course.
I think that what is really helpful with our attention is to realize that there's only 2 places that our attention can be. Our attention can either be in thought, or our attention can be in experience, right? And so if my attention is in thought, it might be in the future. I might be thinking about the future. It might be in the past. It could be fully in imagination. And noticing that your attention is a place, that if you're thinking about the past, that's where your attention is as a place. It's in the past. If it's with a movie, my attention is with the movie. That's a different place. But if you move your attention to what your feet feel like, that's a very different experience. And if you move your attention to what your breath feels like, or what your seat feels like, literally moving your attention there is the act of being able to move your attention around and have more agency in where your attention is. And so as you start to realize that, okay, all of my thoughts, most of my thoughts are capturing me, I'm believing them, I'm getting anxious about them, I'm getting here, having a cutoff to be able to come back to breath just as the anchor, to drop whatever you're attached to in the moment and come into physical sensation, you start to realize that you calm down, you start to get in touch with the beauty of the moment, you start to be able to, just really not get lost in thought, because most people are just continually lost in this thought, the next thought. They think they have to figure something out. They're, completely overwhelmed by that. And we're only getting more choice and more places where our attention can be captured. And, everything we're seeing with the news and advertisers and everything, it's a constant fight for your attention. Right. So
it's the attention economy, as they say.
It's the attention economy, right? The news is trying to sensationalize itself so that we get worried, so that we pay attention and they can make money off the clicks. Advertisers are trying to pull your attention over here. And if you don't have any mastery over what your attention is doing, you become much more a victim of that system than somebody that can navigate it maturely and wisely and resiliently.
That's nice. And I think everybody that comes new to meditation, at least me and most people that I hear talking about failing at meditation, which, after you've done it for a while, you kind of want to go, oh, come here. I want to tell you what you're talking about.
Well, what's funny is, there's no such thing as failing.
I know,
because it's not right. So as
long as you're trying, and then I think.
But what's interesting is that idea of failing is just another idea, right? So that's just another thought or judgment about something. And so when you notice you're doing that, can you put it down and literally be like, what's my breath feel like right now? What's my breath feel like?
Where do I feel pain in my body at this moment?
Exactly. Right.
Right. Yes. All these little tricks. Yeah.
Yeah. But then the judgment of that pain is different than the experience of that pain. So
for sure,
like you've got a low back problem. What we don't notice often is that we're often making up extra and suffering about it. Right. So like pain and suffering are not the same thing. Right. Pain is the physical sensation in your back, which you can just look at and be with and whatever. The suffering is, I like to say this, suffering is the difference between what is and what you would like to be. Right. So
arguing with what is, right?
Yeah. However, as soon as you're not with what is, you're starting to split into, if you're resisting what is to whatever degree, then your suffering begins. And if it's just a little bit of resistance, you're only suffering a little bit. But if it's a lot, like this is completely not okay, whatever's going on is not okay, now you're suffering enormously. So step one is, can you come back in and accept what is? There may be something that needs to change. I might need to do stuff for my back, or I might need to fix a relationship or whatever. But can ground zero be a true, spiritual level kind of acceptance of what is, where you're really not resisting it? And you can watch physical pain actually change in the moment. You can watch your emotional landscape immediately change if you're capable of that. But most people are not very good at that. They stay very attached to how they expect it to be or want it to be. And now they're just complaining either to themselves or to everybody around them with how bad it is. And this is horrible and that's horrible, et cetera.
Yeah. Or, I had an experience with this sort of like arguing with now.
Yes.
Right. So whenever my wife is from Japan. So since we've been married, we've flown back to Japan if we weren't living there, and that's a lot, right? That's just a long trip.
How long is that trip? I don't even know.
It's a really long time. So anywhere from 8 to 12 hours in a plane, and then blah, blah time. That seems like it lasts forever. Right. So,
and that would be longer for me because I'm on the other coast. So
right.
That's right.
So in the past, I'm always just like, I caught myself, right. Sort of like whining to the world inside my head. Yes. And obviously the world can't hear me whining, but man, I am really torturing myself about, why doesn't everybody know I just want to be in bed now?
Yes.
And,
totally.
Yeah. And then at some point I woke up to that. I was doing that. Right. Yeah. And then instead, when I caught myself whining on the airplane in the airport, I would come up with new and interesting tricks about like what you said. It was just like, how bad am I off right now? Am I really, okay, yes, I'm a little tired. I'm a little annoyed. I'm a little uncomfortable. Can I get up and stretch? Would that make me feel a little bit better? Yeah. So I would come up with all these tricks and just stop fucking whining to myself. Is essentially what you're doing. And let me tell you, it's like, and then I get to the airport and I'm like, oh yeah, I've got 6 more hours of screwing around and I got to ride at the train. Whatever. I have a beer and a sandwich and I'm not on that plane anymore. This is pretty awesome right now. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, it's funny. I mean, now is the whole game because there only is now. Yeah. And so what's happening for most of us is we're on this treadmill of becoming, right? In this moment, through messaging or through my own mentality or whatever, I'm not enough. This isn't enough. I don't have enough good friends. I don't have enough money. I don't live in the right place. I don't have the right car. Right. It's all this critique or judgment or thought
You're
about
unconsciously
now
programming yourself.
that is separating me from seeing and being grateful for what is, for noticing the good things, right? We get really good at noticing the differences. And what happens is we all want to get, and you can't see me, but I'm throwing air quotes, we all want to get there.
Yes.
right? There's some there.
Right.
And a lot of coaches will say, well, do you have there really defined? Because if you define there for you, like in all kinds of specifics, you can help to get there better or whatever. Many of us don't, we just know there's a different there. It should be different than here, but we don't even know exactly what that is. But here's the trick that very few people actually get really in touch with. There is no there. There's no such thing as there. It's always here. And,
Right.
and even if we get really good, and you'll see this in wealthy people who can accomplish a lot, but they're not very good at appreciating, what happens is our ability to appreciate now is actually like a muscle. It's an ability to be grateful. It's an ability to be present. It's an ability to do these things. And that muscle of the mind atrophies as you get really obsessed in time and thought. So it's all there. So you can actually accomplish those goals, but you're not very good at appreciating it once you get there, whatever there is. And so you just,
because you're never really there.
Yeah, you've actually created another there, right? So now you've made the $1 million and it's not good enough. And so why isn't it 10? Why don't I have the Bentley yet? Why don't I have the right girlfriend? Why don't I have whatever that is? And so where we're actually trying to get to is here, in a way that here feels amazing and here feels, where I can be happy, fulfilled, where I really love what I am. And it doesn't mean that I don't have that judgment muscle. It doesn't mean I still don't have preferences and I don't want to grow, but can I have that muscle of presence and appreciation and now be very, very loud in my life so I can at least leave one foot in that and really be appreciative. And what happens from there, people think that means you're going to end up meditating on a rock somewhere and doing nothing over the rest of your life because you just love this moment. Not one person's ever done that. The Buddha didn't do that. Jesus didn't do that. Nobody who's been enlightened or woken up did that. They all tend to then go teach and do these really incredibly meaningful things.
You go back out in the world.
Right. Because there is this passage of time. And so, to go create dinner, I still have to think and model and think of what I'm going to do, right? So thinking in time has a place, but we're missing this real deep gravity of how amazing this moment can be, how amazing a song can be, how amazing the sunrise is. These things that are really the spice and the beauty of life, we miss them because we're modeling, well, it'll be better when I make this money or when I finally get the right girlfriend or when whatever these things come up.
As I get older, I find that the beauty of life is really in mundane moments that you are present for. And so I made up this phrase that I like, that I noticed when I was on a bus, like you were on a bus, right?
Yeah.
And I was just sitting there on the bus, sort of, and then having that sort of like 4-year-old contentment kind of moment,
Yes.
And I'm looking at everybody else on the bus and they are in their phone swiping left and swiping left and swiping left. Right? Or
they're
they got
in
their
some
headphones.
form of their suffering.
Right. And I'm just having what I like to lovingly refer to as a mundazing moment. Of just,
dude, I love that. I love that. It's mundazing.
It's mundazing. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm just watching everybody hate themselves on this bus and I'm just loving it,
Yeah.
And so right. Anyway, that was when you said that the bus thing.
I want to share as much mundazing as I can. That's what I'm trying to get people in touch with.
Yeah, but the thing that you remember about life that's important is having another cup of coffee with your mom and dad or something, right?
Yeah,
How many more of those mundazing moments am I going to have before it's time to go to the next thing? The big spectacular things that you put on your website that nobody gives a shit.
Well, and
we know really.
But we know that cognitively, if you're into these big experiences, and this is true for like a big drug experience, or I went to Ibiza and danced with the hottest women, or whatever, whatever your, I had the most amazing wedding day, like whatever it is for people, it actually trains the brain to like it almost resets how high our excitement level needs to be to feel happy. Right. And so it actually, it may be amazing in that moment, but it comes with this cost of then we're not as good at, appreciating these mundane moments because our system is more set up to go, well, that's what was fun. So we start to pattern ourselves into craving more and bigger and better things.
I have two comments.
Yeah, go ahead.
So first one was, I'm not supposed to say, so I'll leave out some details, but there was a zookeeper that thought it would be a good idea to give a no kidding birthday cake, a birthday cake not
What's a no kidding birthday
a
cake?
no kidding birthday cake is a birthday cake made for a human, but they were going to feed it to an elephant for their birthday.
Okay.
So it wasn't like made of, vegetables and things that an elephant should eat. It was made of sugar and eggs and flour, right?
What actually humans should eat also. But
right. So I was skipping ahead because I know the story. So they feed this birthday cake to this elephant, and it ruined him for months because he didn't want to eat his elephant food anymore because he had never had sugar. So that talks to your, oh my God, kind of ruining your brain experience.
Right. Yeah.
And then the other thing was when I was very young, like 18, 19, somewhere like that, I did a talent show in the Air Force at the Air Force Base.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I was in a talent show for Master of Ceremonies, the MC guy, sort of like Ryan Seacrest on a TV show.
Yeah.
And then I also did comedy, like stand-up comedy. And I really stunk at comedy, but I was really good at the MC thing. Just being like the extemporaneous speaker, kind of, riffing and being funny and right. But that high that I got off of that whole weekend experience was the most addictive feeling drug experience I ever had in my life.
Right.
And I coming down from that high. The only thing I could think of was, wow, that shit's dangerous.
It's crazy, right? And I love that because that is kind of the seed of addiction, right? We get this big impulse. And it doesn't have to be to substances. It can be to,
it's just any mind altering experience.
For a young man, pornography, like whatever, right? We end up with these really sort of special, different peak experiences. And then we can get attached and we get coded into, oh, I need that to feel a certain way. There's something outside myself to feel this way. And, the thing that's great is once you understand what I'm trying to share with people, I don't want to imply that you have to avoid those great peak experiences, but they get deeply right-sized so that you realize that it's not the party that's doing it. You can still enjoy the party and probably enjoy it more because you actually are really present and really, in it deeply. I like to share it with a story like this. Imagine being with a ton of friends and you're having this blast and it's so much fun. So often we will, in the middle of the huge guffaws and laughter and all the fun, you go, oh my gosh, guys, like we got to do this again. Why don't we schedule this? Like, let's figure out a time. Can we do this every month? Like, how do we do it?
Right.
And you've actually left the joy of the moment to get into like, how can I control this and do this again? And other people are laughing and they're like, yeah, we'll schedule it or whatever. But you're there like, no, but like, this is so
we
special.
We got to put it on everybody's calendar right now.
How do we do it? And you've immediately left the thing, but we don't notice that we're leaving the actual joy where if you had just been present with that, you could then leave that moment. And that same joy could be the experience of like a cab ride home where you're having this really deep conversation with a cabbie and understanding something different and it's beautiful and maybe it's raining and you're like loving what the city looks like and everything. But that other person is back there going like, oh, I bet people aren't going to follow up. And, they're on creating an event on Facebook to meet again. And, and we get lost into that control and planning and trying to hold on to these peak experiences rather than knowing that at any moment you can be really connected to kind of what's arising and what's really beautiful and happening right there, right? And so that mind of being in experience instead of being in thought, or that's the secret sauce, right?
That's the fundamental. Yes. Yeah. That's the mundazing sort of just developing that muscle to notice.
Correct.
Leaving the moment really is the key. I think.
And there's no shame about it. It's just that is a function of your brain. That next thought will come up.
And you're never, obviously we don't stop that. That's not the goal of sitting there going, bah. It's not like you're a machine with I've got a switch that says present now.
Correct. But what we can do is stop the attachment to that or the unconscious, the unconscious sort of getting lost in it. Right. So, I could be in a conversation with somebody and they're telling me all the stories of their life. And then they look at me and they go, and that's just reality. Right. And it's like, well, yeah, but like none of that stuff is actually really happening now. That's all in your mind. That's your interpretation. Right. That's what you think the future is going to bring. It's not actually reality at all. It's all in your head. Right. Correct. And so, Yeah. So understanding the difference between what is reality and what is thought about reality is a very, very, fundamental skill to figure out.
This has been a blast, but we are wrapping up now. I know it feels weird that we've been talking for almost an hour, but
That's crazy.
I know, right?
That was fast. Wow.
I know. It was fun. So as we wrap up, let's talk a little bit more about all the different stuff you got going on at robscott.com. I know you got a mastermind, you got a coaching community. Talk about all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing that's really, it's sort of like the best deal out there as far as if anybody wanted to get involved with what I do, you could join our Fundamental Shift coaching group, and it's incredibly affordable. It comes with monthly group coaching with me, but it also comes with a suite of personal development products that I've created. So that Back to Breath program's in there, something called Hacking Happy, which really shows you what to do with your attention and your awareness, something called Recode Your Mind, which is how to get at your deepest unconscious limits and shift them. All those come with it, and you could be working on those and whatever's most important to do. And then also in this live group coaching and join the group. That's amazing. The deeper work I do is called identity shifting. I run a high-end mastermind for that. And if anybody wants to do that, that's by application. You end up on the phone with me, seeing if it's a good fit. And those are the two things right now that I'm most excited about, and could help someone out there if they want to grow and change.
Talk a little bit about what you talk about on your Rob Scott podcast.
Yeah. Oh, there's the podcast too. So that's not the first podcast from years ago. Probably the biggest business mistake I ever made was to stop that original podcast.
Podcast is a lot of work.
It is. I didn't know it at the time. I mean, I got into coaching and then I was like, oh, I'll focus on this and that'll be how I share this stuff. And little did I know that, people who started 5 years after me are now the biggest shows in the world. So I really could have been ahead of the curve there. But anyway, that original podcast is out there. That's called Fundamental Shift. I have something now called the Rob Scott Show, where we're trying to share the best personal development tips and, little hacks and tricks and all that stuff. I do that with someone on my team named Sarah, who's, one of my favorite people in the world. And yeah, we get in and we try to share the best stuff that we got about, attention and how do you shift emotions and how do you get out of being stuck and have your best life.
Amazing. So this has been a blast. Thank you. I think it was perfect.
Thank you, brother. Yeah, this has been amazing.
Many more times.
I will come back anytime. It's an absolute pleasure. I love doing this with you.
All right. Thanks, man. You have a good day.
You too, sir.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for taking the time to ride along with us on another episode of Vroom Vroom Veer. For podcast info and show notes, be sure to head over to vvveer.com. That's VVER.com. Man, that's fun to say. And we'll catch up with you next time here on Vroom Vroom Veer.